financial support for his presidential campaign, Woodrow Wilson agreed that if elected, he would sign the Federal Reserve Act. In December 1913, while many members of Congress were home for Christmas, the Federal Reserve Act was rammed through Congress and signed by President Wilson. Regarding his actions, Wilson later admitted, "I have unwittingly ruined my country." The Fed became law the day before Christmas Eve, in the year 1913, and shortly afterwards, the German international bankers, Kuhn, Loeb, and Company sent one of their partners here to run it. President Woodrow Wilson, a great industrial nation, is controlled by its system of credit. Our system of credit is privately concentrated. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all our activities are in the hands of a few men, who necessarily, by very reasons of their own limitations, chill, and check, and destroy genuine economic freedom. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the world, no longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of small groups of dominant men. Just before he died, Wilson is reported to have stated to friends that he had been deceived and that I had betrayed my country. He referred to the Federal Reserve Act passed during his presidency. The unratified 16th Amendment. The Constitution only allowed direct apportioned taxation amongst the states, so indirect income tax was initiated through the 16th Amendment so as to allow Congress to pay the bankers interest on our money and for any other whim. The 16th Amendment was pushed through without proper ratification in February of 1913. According to the two-volume work by Bill Benson and Red Beckman, the law that never was the 16th Amendment, which created the IRS, was never properly ratified, not even by one state. These gentlemen traveled within 48 states to verify that fact. So in a very real sense the income tax isn't legal, as many have proclaimed, but try not paying it, and see how far you get before the feds come after you and confiscate everything you own. World War I started on June 28, 1914, as a direct consequence of the formation of the Federal Reserve Bank. It would not have been possible to start World War I without the formation of the Federal Reserve Bank. The primary beneficiaries of World War I were the owners of the Federal Reserve Bank. After World War I had turned the United States from a debtor nation into a creditor nation. In the aftermath of the war, both the victorious Allies and the defeated Central Powers owed the United States more money than it owed to foreign nations. The Republican administrations of the 1920s insisted on payments in gold bullion, but the world's gold supply was limited, and by the end of the 1920s, the United States itself controlled much of the world's gold supply. Besides gold, which was increasingly in short supply, countries could pay their debts in goods and services. However, protectionism and high tariffs kept foreign goods out of the United States. The Hawley-Smoot Act, 1930, set the highest schedule of tariffs to date. In the January 13, 1918 issue of New York World, William Boyce Thompson, Federal Reserve Bank director and founding member of the Council on Foreign Relations, applauded Russia for their sweeping world changes. The primary shareholders of the Federal Reserve Bank, the Rothschilds, funded the Bolshevik Revolution. They literally sent a train with $50 million worth of gold and 50 or so trained Jewish insurgents to instigate the Communist Revolution. The Great Federal Depression. Within 15 years of the creation of the Federal Reserve Bank, the U.S. experienced its worst depression. The depression was initiated when the Federal Reserve Bank changed the valuation of the dollar, then refused to provide banks with dollar bills, causing a panic and a run on the banks. The primary beneficiaries of the depression were the owners of the bank and their colleagues. In the ensuing panic, the bankers brought one of their own out of retirement from the Morgan/Rothschild banking cartel and made him president. FDR has arguably, along with G.W.B. and Lincoln, have been the nation's worst presidents. April 5, 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued a treasonous executive order ordering citizens to hand their gold and gold certificates to the private Federal Reserve Bank, Executive Order 6102, Section 2. All persons are hereby required to deliver on or before May 1, 1933, to a Federal Reserve Bank, or a branch or agency thereof, or to any member bank of the Federal Reserve System, all gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates now owned by them or coming into their ownership on or before April 28, 1933, Section 9. Whoever willfully violates any provision of this executive order, or of these regulations, or of any rule, regulation, or license issued thereunder, may be fined not more than $10,000, or, if a natural person, may be imprisoned for not more than 10 years, or both. FDR proceeded to implement the New Deal, which converted the United States of America to the United Socialist States of America. Instituting pure socialism in Social Security, the FCC, to control the airwaves, the SEC, to control banking, and eliminate any potential competitors to the private Federal Reserve Bank. We are still suffering the consequences of FDR's criminal New Deal, a central government based on fascist socialism. Does F.D. Roosevelt earn the title of the worst president ever? Read the revealing article Exposing the Real Deal by Robert Higgs, World War II. The word of an economic expansion increased demand for credit. Earnings from rediscounts in the Atlanta Federal Reserve Bank alone rose from $141,774 in 1916 to $1,758,000 in 1918, for example. The Atlanta Fed saw its government securities portfolio burgeon from nothing in 1915 to $19.5 million by 1918. Earnings, fed by the securities, were strong enough in 1917 for the bank to pay all dividends due and still have $80,000 left, of which $40,000 was used to start a surplus account and $40,000 paid to the Treasury as a franchise tax. The bank has first transfer of earnings to the federal Treasury. From 1919 earnings, the bank was able to put $3 million in its surplus. By instigating World War II, the banksters were able to destroy 8 monarchies throughout Europe, while at the same time making extraordinary profits from their armaments companies. U.S. bombing runs on Germany were often specifically targeted at factories of competitors to the banksters while carefully not bombing factories owned by the banksters. On June 4, 1963, President Kennedy signed a presidential decree, Executive Order 11,110. This order virtually stripped the Federal Reserve Bank of its power to loan money to the United States government at interest. President Kennedy declared the privately owned Federal Reserve Bank would soon be out of business. This order gave the Treasury Department the authority to issue silver certificates against any silver in the Treasury. This executive order still stands today. In less than 5 months after signing that executive order, President Kennedy was assassinated on November 22, 1963. The United States notes, silver certificates, he had issued were taken out of circulation immediately. Federal Reserve notes continue to serve as the legal currency of this nation. It is estimated that 99% of all U.S. paper currencies circulating in 1999 are Federal Reserve notes. Who shot Ronald Reagan? When Ronald Reagan attempted to address the problem with the Federal Reserve Bank, another mysterious gunman attempted to assassinate him. 9 American presidents have been the targets of assassination. Andrew Jackson, in 1835, opposed a private national bank. Abraham Lincoln, in 1865, opposed a private national bank. James Garfield, in 1881, opposed a private national bank. William McKinley, in 1901, Harry S. Truman, in 1950, John F. Kennedy, in 1963, opposed a private national bank. Richard Nixon, in 1974, Gerald Ford twice in 1975, and Ronald Reagan in 1981, opposed a private national bank. Whether money is metal, paper, or digital is not the issue is interest. The function of currency is to provide a trading mechanism for the barter of real assets and services. There can be no interest charged for the mere provision of a mechanism to barter. A service fee, yes, but interest, absolutely not. Clive Bostard, founder, chairman, and CEO Infotelesis, and chairman of Liberty for Life Association. See Infotelesis Bank, Infotelesis/Coppercardsbank press release. Infotelesis was building a next-generation internet that would incorporate interest-free currency accessible anywhere in the world through the satellite network the company was building. The Infotelesis team consisted of numerous extraordinarily qualified individuals, including many top banking technology and satellite experts. While working for Sun Microsystems, Clive provided the systems architecture for one of the world's largest banking systems and consulted to many of the top banks around the world. After returning home from the courthouse, while waiting for his home garage door to open, on March 10, 2003, a shooting instructor for the Santa Cruz Sheriffs ran up to Clive's car and shot at Clive from a point-blank range of 2 meters. The shot missed Clive and his children, who were also in the car. The government followed up with a massive malicious prosecution campaign against Clive, filing 7 false cases against him and repeatedly throwing him in jail without any right to bail, thereby eliminating Infotelesis and potential competition to the Federal Reserve Bank. Our misunderstanding is the belief that money is a real asset to the extent where we have allowed this deception to become reality. Money, cash, currency is only a tool, a note, that represents real assets or services in a transaction. The ability to manufacture money, whether the note is printed on metal, paper, or digitally, is something that must be in the free domain. Just as corporations are free to offer notes representing the ownership or stock of a corporation. If we give any person or entity the exclusive right to control the representation or production of notes representing assets and services, we give that person complete control of everything, unless we specifically dictate that the note may bear no interest, and the valuation of assets and services remain free and dynamic. Our lack of understanding of money has resulted in centuries of servitude, and the last 100 years of violent wars. Clive. At first notes were printed on paper or wood, then kings realized they could dominate their subjects by forcing them to only use their notes exclusively. To make it more difficult to counterfeit their notes, kings started printing their notes on metal instead of wood, hence the introduction of the gold standard. Gold and silver certainly have intrinsic value, just as paper does. When it comes to monetary notes, the issue is not the intrinsic value of the material on which the money is represented. The real issue is the acceptance of the note as a form of barter, the stability of the note, and the national and international consequences of employing that specific note. One can just as easily use stock certificates in a respectable company to purchase a house, so long as the seller is able to exchange those stock certificates for other assets. This is why the banksters' key player, FDR, instituted the Securities Exchange Commission, SEC. There really is no need for the SEC. Fraud has always been on the law books. Buyers of a corporate stock have to evaluate the value and integrity of the corporation themselves. Any company wanting to attract buyers to their stock will readily provide all the information the SEC supposedly dictates. In all reality, the SEC is merely a mechanism to eliminate competitors to the privately held Federal Reserve Bank's notes. For the same reason, FDR committed treason when he ordered citizens to hand their gold to that private bank. According to congressional record, the U.S. government can buy back the Fed at any time for $450 million. That's about half the amount of money we pay them daily. As of March 6, 2006, the national debt stands at $8.2 trillion. The American taxpayers have paid the Fed banking system $173,875,979,369.66 in interest on that debt in just 5 short months, from October 2005 through February 2006. No con artist or group of con artists in history has ever perpetrated a scam that even approaches the scope of this one. The Fed allows Congress to spend all they want, that's why your congressperson does nothing. Mr. Chairman, we have in this country one of the most corrupt institutions the world has ever known. I refer to the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Banks, hereinafter called the Fed. The Fed has cheated the government of these United States and the people of the United States out of enough money to pay the nation's debt. The depredations and iniquities of the Fed has cost enough money to pay the national debt several times over. This evil institution has impoverished and ruined the people of these United States, has bankrupted itself, and has practically bankrupted our government. It has done this through the defects of the law under which it operates, through the maladministration of that law by the Fed, and through the corrupt practices of the money vultures who control it. Congressman McFadden on the Federal Reserve Corporation remarks in Congress, 1934 floor of the House of Representatives, by the Honorable Louis D. McFadden of Pennsylvania. Mr. McFadden served as chairman of the Banking and Currency Committee for more than 10 years. There were 2 assassination attempts against McFadden. Why did we give a monopoly of creating money out of thin air to a private corporation? The result is exactly the same as if someone was picking your pocket every year, because that is exactly what they, the Federal Reserve Bank, are doing. Franklin Saunders, author, Tax Honesty. We shall have world government, whether or not we like it. The only question is whether world government will be achieved by conquest or consent. Paul Warburg, Counsel on Foreign Relations and architect of the Federal Reserve System, February 17, 1950, in an address to the U.S. Senate. See also U.S. World Dominance Plan. Who controls money controls the word. Henry Kissinger, Counsel on Foreign Relations. Ron Paul introduces bill to eliminate Federal Reserve Bank, see GovTrack H.R. 2,755,110th Congress, 2007, to abolish the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System and the Federal Reserve. Not CSS Ring and Federal Reserve Note Eagle, a coincidence, or not? Who funded Hitler? On October 24, 1942, the U.S. Gulf seized Nazi assets belonging to Prescott Bush, grandfather of President G.W.B. J.R. See Fed instability and U.S. banking timeline. See Live, Love Oppose Evil, Novus Ordo Seclorum, Metal World. In exchange for financial support for his presidential campaign, Woodrow Wilson agreed that if elected, he would sign the Federal Reserve Act. In December 1913, while many members of Congress were home for Christmas, the Federal Reserve Act was rammed through Congress and signed by President Wilson. Regarding his actions, Wilson later admitted, "I have unwittingly ruined my country." The Fed became law the day before Christmas Eve, in the year 1913, and shortly afterwards, the German international bankers, Kuhn, Loeb, and Company sent one of their partners here to run it. President Woodrow Wilson, a great industrial nation, is controlled by its system of credit. Our system of credit is privately concentrated. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all our activities are in the hands of a few men, who necessarily, by very reasons of their own limitations, chill, and check, and destroy genuine economic freedom. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the world, no longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of small groups of dominant men. Just before he died, Wilson is reported to have stated to friends that he had been deceived and that I had betrayed my country. He referred to the Federal Reserve Act passed during his presidency. The unratified 16th Amendment. The Constitution only allowed direct apportioned taxation amongst the states, so indirect income tax was initiated through the 16th Amendment so as to allow Congress to pay the bankers interest on our money and for any other whim. The 16th Amendment was pushed through without proper ratification in February of 1913. According to the 2-volume work by Bill Benson and Red Beckman, the law that never was the 16th Amendment, which created the IRS, was never properly ratified, not even by one state. These gentlemen traveled within 48 states to verify that fact. So in a very real sense the income tax isn't legal, as many have proclaimed, but try not paying it, and see how far you get before the feds come after you and confiscate everything you own. World War I started on June 28, 1914, as a direct consequence of the